Sarah Chen wiped her sweaty palms on her pristine white lab coat as she stared through the viewport of the shuttle. Space Station Nexus floated before her like a giant silver flower blooming in the darkness of space. Its massive petals were actually docking bays, each one large enough to hold several Earth ships. This would be her home for the next month, and the thought made her stomach do backflips. First time in space, the blue-skinned Centaurian pilot asked, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. First time representing all of humanity, Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady. At 32, she was the youngest person ever invited to the Galactic Engineering Exhibition. And the first human. No pressure, right? The shuttle glided into one of the piddles, and Sarah got her first look at the other attendees. Her eyes widened. She had seen aliens before in videos, but nothing prepared her for the reality. Some were tall and willowy, others short and stocky, and a few seemed to float rather than walk. But what caught her attention most was their size. Many of them were huge compared to her 5'4" frame. A chime sounded through the station, and everyone began moving toward the main exhibition hall. Sarah followed the crowd, clutching her tablet containing her research on micro-robotics. The hall was enormous, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch forever. Holographic displays showcased engineering marvels from across the galaxy, massive space elevators, planet-sized energy collectors, and artificial worlds. Well, what do we have here? A deep, melodious voice said from above Sarah. A tiny human has found its way into our midst. Sarah looked up, and up, and up. Before her stood the most striking alien she had ever seen. Nearly 8 feet tall, with iridescent purple skin that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. 4 arms were crossed over a torso covered in what looked like liquid metal fabric. But it was the alien's eyes that held Sarah's attention. 3 of them, each a different shade of gold, all looking down at her with amused condescension. "Dr. Cathera," Sarah said, recognizing the famous Proximan engineer from scientific journals. "Your work on the Centauri ring world is revolutionary." Cathera's mouth curved into what might have been a smile. "How adorable. It knows who I am." She turned to her companions, all similarly tall and elegant. "Look at this, my friends. Earth sent us their little engineer to play with the adults." The group laughed, a sound like tinkling crystal. Sarah felt her cheeks burn, but she stood her ground. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, and I'm here because my work on micro-scale engineering." "Micro-scale?" Cathera interrupted, letting out another musical laugh. "Oh, that's precious. You're studying engineering that matches your size." She gestured at the holographic displays around them. "This is the Galactic Engineering Exhibition, little one. We build works that reshape worlds, harness the power of stars. You're simply," she paused, looking Sarah up and down, "too small to satisfy my desires for true engineering greatness." The other aliens tittered, and Sarah felt her embarrassment turn to anger. She opened her mouth to respond, but Cathera was already turning away, her attention dismissively shifting elsewhere. "Do try to avoid getting stepped on," Cathera called over her shoulder. "The cleaning drones hate dealing with organic matter." Sarah watched them glide away, her hands clenched into fists. Around her, the exhibition continued, filled with displays of massive engineering projects that dwarfed anything humanity had achieved. But as she looked at them with new eyes, she began to notice something. All these grand projects, these enormous constructions, they all shared the same problem. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the biggest problems needed the smallest solutions, and she was about to prove it. Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. The next morning, Sarah sat in the back of the exhibition hall, watching various engineers present their projects. Her tablet was filled with notes, but her mind kept returning to Cathera's words from yesterday. The Proximan engineer sat in the front row, her purple skin glowing under the bright lights as she criticized each presentation with cutting remarks. Uninspired, Cathera called out as a green-skinned engineer finished showing his design for a new type of space elevator. "We've been building these for centuries. Where is the innovation? Sarah noticed something interesting. Thera always focused on size. Bigger was better in her mind. Everything had to be massive, grand, impressive. But Sarah knew from her work on Earth that sometimes the smallest things could have the biggest impact. Then Thera stood up for her own presentation. The holographic display lit up with images of a barren, rust-colored world. "This," Thera announced, her voice filling the hall, "is Proxima, the moon of my homeworld. For 500 years, my people have tried to make it habitable." She waved one of her 4 arms, and the image zoomed in to show massive machines rusting in the toxic atmosphere. "Our greatest minds have failed. Our largest machines have broken down. The atmosphere is too corrosive, the soil too toxic." Sarah leaned forward, suddenly interested. She had studied Proxima during her doctorate. The moon's problems weren't about size at all. They were about chemistry. "Perhaps," Thera continued, looking directly at Sarah with all 3 golden eyes, "our new human guest would like to try. After all, she specializes in—" what was it? Microengineering. Her musical laugh filled the room. "Surely if our greatest machines can't solve this problem, your tiny robots will fail even faster." The room grew quiet. Sarah felt every alien eye turn toward her. This was a trap, she knew. Thera was trying to humiliate her in front of the galaxy's greatest engineers. The smart thing would be to stay quiet, to let the challenge pass. But Sarah Chen had never been very good at staying quiet. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly in the silence. "I accept." Thera's eyes widened slightly. "Oh, the little human wants to play." She smiled, showing teeth that sparkled like diamonds. "Very well. Let's make it interesting. You have 1 Earth month. If you can make any measurable progress in terraforming Proxima, I will personally apologize for underestimating you. If you fail," her smile grew wider, "you will admit that human engineering is nothing but a child's toy compared to real galactic science." Sarah walked down to the front of the hall, feeling surprisingly calm. "I accept those terms, but I have one condition." She pointed at the hologram of Proxima. "I want full access to all previous research and attempts to terraform the moon. Every detail, every failure, everything." Thera waved a hand dismissively. "Of course, it will only show you how impossible your task is." She turned to the crowd. "Witnesses, you have heard the challenge. 1 month for the human to prove that her tiny technology can succeed where our greatest works have failed." The aliens muttered among themselves. Many were already placing bets on how quickly Sarah would give up. But she wasn't listening to them. She was looking at the hologram of Proxima, her mind already racing with possibilities. "One more thing," Sarah said, still staring at the toxic world that would make or break her career. "I'll need a workshop. A small one will do." She smiled up at Thera. "After all, I work in microscale." The challenge was set. Now she just had to figure out how to reshape a world using machines smaller than a grain of sand. Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. Sarah's workshop was exactly what she had asked for. Small. The aliens had given her what they thought was an insult. A room barely bigger than her old office back on Earth. But it was perfect for her needs. The walls were covered with holographic displays showing data from 500 years of failed attempts to terraform Proxima. She had been studying them for 3 days straight, stopping only when her body forced her to sleep. "More coffee," she muttered to herself, taking another sip from her mug. The station's food synthesizer couldn't make great coffee, but it was better than nothing. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Thera, ducking her tall frame to enter the small space. "Still wasting time, little human." Sarah didn't look up from her work. "Did you know that every single attempt to terraform Proxima used the same approach?" She waved at the displays. Big machines, huge atmosphere processors, massive soil converters, and they all failed the same way. Thera frowned. The atmosphere's corrosive compounds destroyed them. That's why we need even bigger machines with stronger protection. No, Sarah interrupted, finally looking up. That's exactly wrong. You're thinking like a proximan. Everything has to be big, impressive, powerful. But look at this. She pulled up a detailed scan of the moon's atmosphere. The problem isn't at the macro level. It's molecular. She stood up and walked to the main display. Your machines tried to brute force the atmosphere, to overpower it. But the toxic compounds just ate through everything. You can't fight chemistry with size. Then what do you suggest? Cthera asked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Ask the molecules nicely. Sarah smiled. No, I'm going to change them. She tapped her tablet, and a new image appeared. It looked like a tiny metal spider, smaller than a grain of sand. Meet my solution. Cthera leaned closer, all three eyes squinting. What is this? A toy. This is a micro-scale atmospheric conversion unit, Sarah explained. It's designed to seek out specific molecular compounds and break them down into harmless elements, and it can replicate itself using available materials. She brought up another image, showing thousands of the tiny machines working together. They form networks, sharing data and resources. When they break down the toxic compounds, they use the components to build more of themselves. A self-sustaining, growing system that works with the environment instead of fighting it. Cthera was silent for a moment, studying the designs. Then she laughed. This is your grand solution. Microscopic machines that will be destroyed by the first acid storm they encounter. Actually, Sarah said, walking to a sealed container in the corner of her workshop, they're already working. She pressed a button, and the container's top turned transparent. Inside was a sample of Proxima B's atmosphere, swirling with its characteristic red toxins, and in that toxic soup, tiny silver specks were moving, multiplying, changing the red gas to clear. Cthera's laughter stopped. She stared at the container, then at Sarah. How? Like I said, you can't fight chemistry with size, but you can fight it with chemistry. Sarah picked up the container, watching her tiny machines work. These are just the prototypes. The real ones will be even smaller, more efficient, and in 7 days, I'll have enough to start the real work. Cthera straightened up, her purple skin flickering with what might have been anger, or maybe worry. 7 days. You'll never have enough to cover the whole moon. Sarah set down the container and turned back to her work. You're still thinking about size, Cthera. I'm thinking about exponential growth. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. After Cthera left, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The big test was still to come, but for the first time, she had seen doubt in those golden eyes. Sometimes, the smallest things could shake the largest confidence. Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. News spread quickly on Space Station Nexus. Within days, Sarah's workshop became a tourist attraction. Alien engineers would stop by throughout the day, pressing their faces against the transparent wall to watch the tiny human work with her even tinier machines. Look at her, playing with dust, one would say. How cute. She thinks she can change a world with specks, another would laugh. Sarah ignored them all. She had worked through worse conditions during her doctorate. At least these aliens weren't throwing paper airplanes at her like her college classmates used to do. Cthera, however, was harder to ignore. The tall Proximan would visit twice a day, always bringing an audience with her. Time for our daily inspection, Cthera announced, entering the workshop with 5 other alien engineers. Let's see how our little humans' little toys are progressing. Sarah looked up from her microscope. Her eyes were red from lack of sleep, but there was a smile on her face. Perfect timing. I just finished the final prototype. She pressed a button, and a hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed one of her machines, but different from before. This version was even smaller, more streamlined. Behold, one of Cthera's companions said in a mocking tone, it's even smaller than the last one. Soon they'll be too tiny to see at all. The group burst into laughter, But Sarah's smile didn't fade. She walked to a sealed container in the corner. Inside, a sample of Proxima's atmosphere swirled angry and red. "Would you like to see what these invisible machines can do?" Without waiting for an answer, she inserted a small capsule into the container. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, like silver rain, thousands of tiny specks scattered through the toxic gas. "Watch carefully," Sarah said. The aliens leaned closer, their laughter dying away. The silver specks were moving with purpose, connecting to each other in complex patterns. Where they touched the red gas, it began to change color. "Impossible," one of the engineers whispered. "The toxicity levels," another said, checking a scanner. "They're dropping." Cthera pushed forward, her golden eyes wide. "Stop this. These readings must be wrong. Nothing can process atmospheric toxins this quickly." "Nothing big can," Sarah corrected her, "but my machines work at the molecular level. They don't fight the toxins. They take them apart and use the components to make more machines. The more toxins they encounter, the more of them there are to do the work." She pointed to the container. The red gas was almost completely clear now, and the silver specks had multiplied visibly. And the best part, they're self-limiting. Once the toxins are gone, they go dormant. No energy wasted, no resources consumed unnecessarily. Cthera stared at the container, then at her scanner, then at Sarah. For once, she seemed at a loss for words. "Oh, and one more thing," Sarah added, picking up a small box from her workbench. "These were just the prototypes. The real deployment units are ready." She opened the box, revealing rows of capsules, each containing millions of the microscopic machines. "Tomorrow, we start the real test. Unless, of course, you'd like to admit now that size isn't everything." The aliens filed out of her workshop in silence, Cthera last among them. But just before the door closed, Sarah heard one of them say, Perhaps we should rethink our approach to the Grain 15 asteroid mining project." Sarah turned back to her work, hiding a grin. The real challenge was still to come, releasing her machines into Proxima's actual atmosphere. But for now, she had accomplished something just as important. She had made them doubt their assumptions about size and power. Sometimes, she thought, the smallest victories could lead to the biggest changes. Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. The launch bay of Space Station Nexus was crowded with alien engineers. They had all come to watch what many were calling the human's last stand. Sarah stood next to her small deployment ship, checking the containers of her micro-machines one last time. "Quite an audience," a familiar voice said. Thera walked up, her purple skin shimmering with barely hidden excitement. "They're all eager to see your little experiment fail." Sarah secured the last container. "Then let's not keep them waiting." The deployment ship was tiny compared to the massive vessels the aliens usually used. It looked like a silver teardrop, just big enough for one person and the cargo. Sarah had designed it specially for this mission. Small, agile, and protected against Proxima's harsh atmosphere. "Last chance to back out," Cthera said as Sarah climbed into the pilot's seat. "You could admit defeat now and save yourself the embarrassment." Sarah just smiled and closed the cockpit. The journey to Proxima took 3 hours. The rust-colored moon grew larger in her viewport, its toxic atmosphere swirling with angry red clouds. Previous expedition ships lay scattered across its surface like broken toys, their massive frames eaten away by the corrosive air. "Beginning deployment sequence," Sarah announced over the radio. She knew everyone back on the station was watching through her ship's cameras. She pressed a button, and the first container of micro-machines released into the atmosphere. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, like a silver mist, the machines spread out, catching the light of the nearby star. "Initial readings coming in," someone said over the radio. "Atmospheric toxicity in deployment zone. This can't be right." "What's happening?" Cthera's voice demanded. "The toxicity levels are dropping." Fast. The machines are replicating at an exponential rate. Sarah piloted her ship in a low orbit, releasing more containers at strategic points. Each release created another silver cloud that spread rapidly through the red atmosphere. Where the machines passed, the angry red color faded to clear. "Look at the surface readings," another voice exclaimed. "The machines aren't just cleaning the air, they're processing the toxic soil too." Through her viewport, Sarah could see it happening. The silver clouds were settling on the ground like glittering dew, and wherever they touched, the rusty color began to change. The machines were breaking down the toxic compounds in the soil, using the components to make more of themselves. "Impossible," Thera whispered over the radio. "The entire northern hemisphere. The readings are all changing." Sarah checked her instruments. The micro-machines were spreading faster than even she had expected. They formed networks as they worked, sharing data and resources, adapting to different concentrations of toxins. "How?" Thera asked. "How can something so small work so quickly?" "Because they work together," Sarah explained, watching another silver cloud spread across the surface. "Each machine is tiny, yes, but there are billions of them now, trillions soon. Size isn't about how big each piece is, it's about how they work together." She completed her orbit, releasing the last container. Below her, Proxima was transforming. Where there had been only toxic red, now there were growing patches of clear sky and clean soil. The great machines of previous attempts lay dead on the surface, but her tiny machines were very much alive, spreading like a benevolent infection across the world. "Sometimes," Sarah said softly, "the smallest things can change the biggest worlds." Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. 2 weeks had passed since the initial deployment. The observation deck of Space Station Nexus was packed with engineers from across the galaxy, all watching the transformation of Proxima on the massive view screens. Sarah sat quietly in the back, dark circles under her eyes from countless hours of monitoring data. But she couldn't stop smiling. The screens showed her silver machines continuing their work, spreading across the moon's surface like morning dew. The southern polar region is now 60% processed, an analyst announced. Toxicity levels dropping steadily. Soil samples from the equatorial zones show complete molecular restructuring. Another added, "The land could support basic plant life within days." The room buzzed with excited discussions. Engineers who had laughed at Sarah's tiny toys were now crowding around her data terminals, studying the work of her micro-machines with intense interest. Thera stood at the front of the room, her purple skin flickering with changing emotions as she watched the screens. Finally, she turned and walked to where Sarah sat. "I need to understand," Thera said, her voice lacking its usual mockery. "We spent centuries trying to terraform Proxima. Our greatest machines, our most powerful technologies, all failed. How did you know this would work?" Sarah gestured to an empty seat beside her. "On Earth, we have these insects called ants. Each one is tiny, barely noticeable. But together, millions of ants can build vast underground cities, move mountains of Earth, even change entire ecosystems." She pulled up a detailed view of her machines at work. "I didn't try to fight your moon's toxic atmosphere. I created helpers that could work with it, break it down from the inside. Each machine is small, yes, but they work together, learn together, adapt together." Thera watched the screens in silence. The machines had developed new patterns Sarah hadn't even programmed. They formed complex networks, sharing resources and information, becoming more efficient with each passing hour. "We always thought bigger was better," Thera said softly. "Bigger machines, bigger solutions, bigger everything. We never considered." She trailed off, looking troubled. "That small things could solve big problems." Sarah finished for her. "Size isn't everything, Thera. Sometimes the smallest tool is exactly what you need." A commotion at the front of the room interrupted them. New data was coming in from the surface sensors. "The northern hemisphere is showing signs of natural air circulation," someone shouted. The machines have created enough clean atmosphere to generate weather patterns. The room erupted in cheers. On the main screen, they could see clouds forming in Proxima's newly cleaned atmosphere. Real clouds, not toxic storms. In 2 weeks, Sarah's tiny machines had accomplished more than centuries of massive engineering projects. Ferris stood up suddenly. "Come with me," she said to Sarah. "I need to show you something." She led Sarah to her private laboratory. Inside, Cathera activated a hologram showing designs for a massive mining operation. "This is our next great project," Cathera explained. "We plan to use giant machines to break down asteroids for resources. But perhaps," she looked at Sarah with all 3 golden eyes, "perhaps you could show me how to think smaller." Sarah studied the designs, her mind already filling with possibilities. "I think," she said with a smile, "this could be the beginning of a very interesting partnership." Outside the lab's window, Proxima shone in space, its angry red color fading more with each passing hour. Sarah's small solutions were reshaping an entire world, and perhaps even more importantly, they were reshaping how the galaxy's greatest engineers thought about problem solving. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest steps. Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. The Galactic Engineering Exhibition was entering its final week. The main hall, which once displayed massive machines and grand projects, now featured something very different. A microscope station where engineers could watch Sarah's tiny machines at work. Farah stood at one of these stations, her tall frame bent over as she adjusted the controls. On the screen before her, silver microscopic robots worked together to break down a particularly stubborn toxic compound from Proxima's soil. "Fascinating," she murmured. "They're communicating with each other, sharing resources." Sarah nodded, standing beside her former rival. "They learn from each other too. See how they've modified their approach." She pointed to a group of machines that had developed a new pattern. "I didn't program that. They evolved it themselves." The change in Cathera over the past weeks had been remarkable. The proud Proximan engineer who once mocked anything small now spent hours studying Sarah's micro-machines, asking questions and sharing her own knowledge. "We were wrong," Cathera said suddenly, straightening up to her full height. "Not just about Proxima, but about so many things. We thought engineering was about building bigger, stronger, more impressive machines. We never considered," she gestured at the microscope, "we never considered that the answer might be too small to see." Sarah smiled. "Size isn't everything. But neither is being small. It's about using the right tool for the right job. Which is why I have a proposal for you." Farah activated a hologram in the center of the room. It showed a massive space station, but unlike anything Sarah had seen before. "This is the Proximan Science Academy," Cathera explained. "The greatest engineering school in our sector of the galaxy. We want to create a new department, one dedicated to micro-engineering and hybrid solutions." She looked at Sarah with all 3 golden eyes. "We want you to lead it." Sarah stared at the hologram, stunned. "Me? But I'm just. If you say just a small human, I will be very disappointed." Cathera interrupted, a hint of her old commanding tone returning. "You have proven that the greatest solutions can come in the smallest packages. My people need to learn this. The whole galaxy needs to learn this." She waved her hand, and the hologram changed to show a laboratory filled with both massive Proximan equipment and human-scaled workstations. "We can combine our approaches. Your micro-engineering with our macro-scale projects. Think of what we could accomplish together." Sarah walked around the hologram, studying the details. "A human teaching at the Proximan Science Academy. That's never happened before. Many things that have never happened before are happening now." Farah pointed out the window toward Proxima. The moon that was once toxic red now showed patches of blue and green where the atmosphere had cleared and the first plants were taking root. "Your small machines did what our greatest engineers couldn't," Thera continued. "They didn't just change a world. They changed how we think about engineering itself." She held out one of her 4 hands to Sarah. Will you help us continue that change? Sarah looked at the offered hand, then at the hologram of the Academy, and finally at Proxima hanging in space. 3 weeks ago, she had come to this station feeling small and out of place. Now she stood as an equal with one of the galaxy's greatest engineers, ready to help shape the future of galactic engineering. She took Thera's hand. When do we start? Asterisk to be continued. Asterisk. 1 month had passed since Sarah first arrived at Space Station Nexus. She stood in the main exhibition hall, now packed with engineers from across the galaxy for the closing ceremony. The massive screens behind her showed live feeds from Proxima's surface. The transformation was stunning. Where toxic red clouds once swirled, clear blue skies now stretched over vast plains of newly cleaned soil. The first test plants, specially bred for the environment, had taken root and were spreading across the surface. The great rusted machines of failed terraforming attempts still dotted the landscape, but now they served as monuments to old thinking. Thera stepped onto the stage, her purple skin glowing with pride. "Engineers of the galaxy," she announced, her voice carrying through the hall. "We are here to conclude this year's exhibition. But more importantly, we are here to recognize a fundamental change in how we approach our craft." She gestured to the screens. "For centuries, we believed that bigger was always better. That the solution to any problem was to build a larger machine, a grander device, a more massive construction." She paused, looking at Sarah. "We were wrong." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. It was rare to hear the proud Proximan admit to being wrong about anything. "Dr. Sarah Chenoweth has shown us a new way." Farah held up a small container of Sarah's micro-machines, letting it catch the light. "These machines, each smaller than a grain of sand, have accomplished what our greatest works could not. They have made Proxima habitable. And they have taught us all a valuable lesson." Sarah walked onto the stage as Thera continued. "The Proximan Science Academy is proud to announce the establishment of the Microengineering and Hybrid Solutions Department, led by Dr. Chen. We will learn to combine the best of both approaches, the massive and the microscopic, the grand and the subtle." The crowd erupted in applause. Sarah saw many of the engineers who had once mocked her now nodding in approval. Some were already holding up their tablets, eager to sign up for the new programs. "And one more thing," Thera added, her 3 golden eyes twinkling. "I believe I owe someone an apology." She turned to Sarah. "1 month ago, I said you were too small to satisfy my desires for true engineering greatness. I was wrong. You have shown us that true greatness has nothing to do with size." She held out all 4 hands to Sarah. "You have not only satisfied my desires for engineering excellence, you have exceeded them. Will you forgive my earlier short-sightedness?" Sarah took Thera's hands in her own much smaller ones. "There's nothing to forgive. We've all learned from this. Sometimes we need big solutions, sometimes we need small ones. The trick is knowing when to use each." The ceremony continued with presentations of new projects combining both approaches. Engineers who once competed now collaborated, sharing ideas about how to blend macro and micro solutions. Sarah saw designs for space elevators aided by swarms of maintenance robots, asteroid mining operations using both massive drills and tiny resource extractors, and planetary shields combining huge energy projectors with microscopic repair systems. As the ceremony ended, Sarah walked to the observation window. Proxima shone in the distance, its surface already showing the first hints of green where plants were taking root. Soon, it would be ready for colonization. "Small solutions for big problems," Thera said, joining her at the window. "Who would have thought?" Sarah smiled. "It's not about being big or small. It's about finding the right solution, no matter what size it comes in." Together, they watched the transformed world spin below, proof that sometimes the biggest changes come from the smallest beginnings. Asterisk, the end asterisk.